The NFL draft is over, which means that it is officially rookie draft season. So I am here to bring you my rookie tiered rankings before you head into your fantasy football drafts. Number one, in a tier of his own, he's been in a tier of his own forever. It's Bijan Robinson. He landed in the perfect spot with the Atlanta Falcons, a team that is built to run the football. Obviously, they've got Drake London, they've got Kyle Pitts. They don't really have anyone to throw them the ball unless you really believe in Desmond Ridder. The reality is, Bijan Robinson could be 300 plus touches in his rookie year. He's going to be a top 5 running back in 2023, and he is the Dynasty RB1. There's no questions asked. Even if you have no one on your roster, the number 1 pick is Bijan Robinson. He's that good. He's that talented. And if you absolutely don't want to do it, trade the pick. But the reality is, get the player, let him go off. You'll get even more value because his value is going to continue to climb. He's the only running back that you want to try to build a dynasty roster around. Okay, tier 2 is also one player, and it is Anthony Richardson. So Anthony Richardson, he landed on the Colts in the Shane Steichen offense, which is incredible. Steichen helped Justin Herbert in his rookie year. He obviously turned Jalen Hurts into what we all know Jalen Hurts as, an elite fantasy quarterback. And in Superflex leagues, Richardson really is the only option at 102. You might like some of the other players, and sure, he was the 3rd quarterback taken, but he brings the intangibles. He brings the insane rushing upside. He's on an offense that has way more weapons than any other team of a rookie quarterback. He's got Michael Pittman, he's got Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, Jelani Woods, Jonathan Taylor, and a decent offensive line. He actually probably will benefit from this offensive line not being as good as the Houston Texans or the Carolina Panthers because he's a mobile quarterback. He's going to make plays with his legs. He is going to bring you that rushing floor. Last season, Justin Fields was a top 5 fantasy football quarterback, and he threw for just over 2,000 yards. I think that's well within the range for Anthony Richardson. Okay, this is where you might see some differences in my tiered rankings versus a lot of other analysts in the industry right now. So my tier 3 contains 4 players. It contains CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba. There's a reason I have all 4 here. Stroud, to me, even though I do believe in his talent, he's my number 1 overall NFL talent quarterback because I think he can come in and be a very good quarterback right away, and actually a very good quarterback, not just a freak athlete. And so he is on a team that's got a really good offensive line, but virtually 0 weapons, and they're not likely to add any first-round weapons in the near future because they traded that away to go get Will Anderson in this year's draft. So Stroud's got some things going against him. He is a solid floor option at QB. So if you are looking for your QB2, you're stacked everywhere else on your roster, go ahead, take Stroud in this tier because he is one of the guys who I think is a QB2 and might get to that QB1 ceiling, but I just don't know if it's going to be in the cards in the next year or two, and that's really what I'm thinking of when I'm drafting these guys. Obviously, Bryce Young was the number 1 overall pick. Similar situation. He has got a decent offensive line. He's got Miles Sanders. He doesn't really have too much to work with in the passing game. Also, it comes in with the question of his height, his size. Is that going to work in the NFL? I'm sure it will because he is such a smart, intuitive player. He's a fine-tuned quarterback rather than, like I said, an athlete like Anthony Richardson. So he is still in this tier, but he's the guy who I think has the most risks of between him and Stroud. So he is my QB3 for fantasy football, and he is the second guy in this tier. Jahmyr Gibbs was picked 12 overall. That skyrockets his value because he was a guy who a lot of people thought might slip into the end of the first round, probably a top of the second round kind of guy. But with that kind of draft capital, his comps changed drastically. He moves from like a Gio Bernard type comp to a Christian McCaffrey. He's likely to add a few pounds here or there, but the size overall isn't a huge game changer for me because he is likely to be an outlier. He's got that draft capital. He's going to be the pass catching back for the Detroit Lions. And the reality is the Lions are without Jameson Williams for the first 6 games of the year. They've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, but otherwise they don't really have a ton of passing down options. The coaches for the Detroit Lions, the front office for the Detroit Lions have been highlighting Jahmyr Gibbs' speed and his passing down involvement in their offense. He is probably going to be a top 5 dynasty running back. Right now, when you're looking at 2023 only, he might be more of a top 15 running back, and that's totally fine with me. Buy in on Jahmyr Gibbs, and if you aren't desperate at quarterback, say you've got a decent quarterback 2 and a solid quarterback 1, I'm fine taking Gibbs over either of the quarterbacks for that reason. Okay, to wrap up tier 3 for me, it's Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Now, I am always typically wide receiver over running back. I think the draft capital was the big separator between Gibbs and Jaxon Smith-Njigba for me, but people should not be scared of the Seattle Seahawks landing spot. He's got Shane Waldron as his offensive coordinator in Seattle. Shane Waldron came from the LA Rams, where he utilized the slot wide receiver, as we know, a ton. He became the number one wide receiver in all of fantasy football, one of the number one players in all of fantasy football in Cooper Kupp. And Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen is kind of what you can comp a Jaxon Smith-Njigba to. He is going to be a perfect fit to this offense. In year one, maybe he's looking at 800, 850 yards, handful of touchdowns in this offense. But long term, he is likely to be a fine 1B at the worst to DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett is going into his age 31 season. He's a great mentor type player for a Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And I think that JSN might even fight for that 1A option in this offense just because of how Shane Waldron tends to work. DK, he's not really getting a knock, so don't really worry about him. But Jaxon Smith-Njigba is the real deal. I am fine taking him as early as 3. Likely more as the 4 or 5 spot is where I would love to take him if you have that flexibility in your rookie drafts. All right, so tier 4 is one player. You can see a trend here. There's a couple one player tiers, but it's one player for a reason for me. It's Jordan Addison. Obviously, Addison's combine knocked him down a few pegs in people's perceived value of what he can bring to an NFL team, but the Vikings drafted Jordan Addison. I would not be surprised if he is the most productive wide receiver in his rookie year of this entire class. Adam Thielen is no longer a Minnesota Viking, and when Adam Thielen was a good player, he was someone who you could rely on in fantasy football. And you're like, okay, well, is Jordan Addison as good? Yes, Jordan Addison is a very, very good wide receiver. He's going to immediately be the wide receiver 2. I think Jordan Addison could lead all rookie wide receivers in yardage, maybe touchdowns. We'll see. TJ Hawkinson being there is a big threat to his touchdown value, but he could also lead all rookie wide receivers in targets with a Kirk Cousins who is trying to figure out if he's going to be a Minnesota Viking for the next couple of years. And I think Jordan Addison is a nice fit for this offense. All right, my next tier is 3 players. We got 2 wide receivers and the first tight end. And my next wide receiver up is my wide receiver 3. It is Zay Flowers. Now, Zay Flowers, he landed in Baltimore, and typically that has been kind of a damning landing spot for wide receivers in fantasy football. But there is a new OC in Baltimore. Todd Monken's going to come in. He's going to utilize these wide receivers in the way that we have been praying and praying and praying that they get used. I think Lamar could have his best passing season that he's ever had in the NFL. I think Rashad Bateman is a nice complement to a Zay Flowers. Bateman will likely fill that X role, and Zay Flowers will be moved all around the formation. He'll be used as a flanker. He'll be used in the slot. There is tons of options for Zay Flowers to succeed in this offense. He is likely to be the number 2 or 3 at worst passing option in this offense, and I think Zay Flowers, even if he has a slower start in 2023, could be a top 20, 25 dynasty wide receiver. And at the end of your first round of your Superflex rookie mocks or rookie drafts, I think that is a fine investment to make. The next guy in my tier is Quentin Johnston. Obviously, he landed in an awesome spot with the LA Chargers. He's got Justin Herbert, and really his competition is 2 aging wide receivers in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. The only real caveat here is the red flags from QJ were what we saw in his tape. He played much smaller than his size. He wasn't as natural as a hands catcher as we were hoping for, but he was incredible after the catch. And that was one of his biggest calling cards. And for someone of his size, it's just a really interesting situation for him. So right now, he is going to be the wide receiver 3 for this team. I'm sorry, Josh Palmer fans, I was one of them. But the reality is, his value is most likely dead. I think QJ is going to slot right in as the wide receiver 3. I am hesitant to say that he is going to break out and have some phenomenal rookie or even sophomore season, depending on, the health of those 2 other wide receivers. Ultimately, he's looking more like a low-end wide receiver 2 with upside for dynasty purposes, and I don't think he comes close to the wide receiver 2 conversation in 2023. He might need an injury to one or both of the guys ahead of him for him to get enough volume, enough consistency to be a true fantasy asset in 2023. The next guy and final guy in this tier is the first tight end off the board, Dalton Kincaid. He lands in a dream spot-ish with the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills have kind of had this interesting situation where they haven't had that real consistent number 2 pass catcher. Dawson Knox as the tight end didn't see volume. He was very touchdown dependent. And Gabe Davis is the guy who everyone wants to believe in that really just isn't it. He isn't. He is a solid third option in a passing attack. And I think Kincaid brings some really interesting versatility to this offense. I think he's probably going to be on the field with Dawson Knox really often. I think Dawson Knox will be kind of your inline standard tight end. And I think Dalton Kincaid is going to line up out of the slot quite often. He could be the number 2 passing option in this offense. Roschon Johnston is next for me. He went in the 4th round, first pick of the 4th round to the Chicago Bears. And that landing spot is perfect. It's a team that wants to just run. And when they're done doing that, they want to run some more. Obviously, Justin Fields has an improved offensive line, but Roschon Johnston is a big-bodied guy. He's incredible at pass blocking. He is really good at gaining yards after contact, and he's also a very elusive runner for a guy of his size, coming in at 6 foot, 219, 220. He is going to be a difference maker for this Bears offense, and I think he wins the job as early as week 1, week 2 in the season, because Khalil Herbert profiles as more of an elite RB2 for a team, and I think he is going to probably be that. This is going to be a really good 1-2 punch, 1-2-3 punch if you count Justin Fields. Next up in the same tier is Kendre Miller. Kendre Miller was a day 2 pick, but he's got to deal with Alvin Kamara. He's got to deal with Jamal Williams. I think he probably beats Jamal Williams fairly easily, and if Alvin Kamara doesn't have any sort of suspension, Kendre Miller is probably going to be like a Mark Ingram light role for the old school Saints. You know what I mean? So he's one of those guys who's a playmaker. He can do kind of everything, but he's not elite at anything. He's a jack of all trades. I look at him as a David Montgomery with a quicker first step. And that is something that will have value. I don't think he's going to be some breakout phenom, but he is going to be a high floor option at the running back position. And he's probably going to maintain value for a long time. And he has the caveat of if Kamara does get suspended for, like 6 games or something, Kendre Miller could be a steal of your rookie drafts. Okay, the next guys on my list is Zach Charbonnet, Devon Achane. Charbonnet, there's not a ton to talk about that you haven't heard everywhere else. He landed with the Seattle Seahawks. He's sharing a backfield with Kenneth Walker. He is probably going to take over a lot of the passing down work. It might take a little bit longer into the season. I see these guys running in a 60-40, 50-50 split by the end of the year, kind of cannibalizing each other's volume, cannibalizing each other's touches and quality of touches. Ultimately, we're looking at an RB3 with upside unless an injury happens for Zach Charbonnet. Last is Devon Achane. Obviously, he landed in the perfect spot with the Miami Dolphins. He got good draft capital, all the things you want to see. Really, the only knock for him, similar to QJ, is just the stuff that you can't really change right now, and it's his size. He lands on an offense that utilizes his kind of profile as a running back really well. He's really like a younger, probably better between the tackles version of Raheem Mostert, who is also on the Miami Dolphins. So the fit, the draft capital all says you should buy in on Devon Achane. I think he's an early 2nd round pick because that size thing is just something that, as much as we want to all overlook it and say, it'll be fine, you just can't do it. We just don't have any historical data that shows us that that is something that you can just shake off and move on from. The Dolphins will find a way to use him in this offense in the what people are calling the Legion of Zoom. I'm all about it. I just think you should temper expectations and truly expect someone who's going to get probably a lower number of touches, but will be highly efficient with those touches. The next tier contains 6 players. It's got a running back, a couple wide receivers, a tight end. We've got Tank Bigsby, Josh Downs, Marvin Mims, Jayden Reed, Michael Mayer, and Cedric Tillman. Now, I like a lot of these guys. I think landing spot and draft capital is the reason why they're kind of all together. They all have potential, but they do have some red flags or they didn't quite get the draft capital. I'm going to highlight Tank Bigsby. I think he landed in a perfect spot with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He is probably going to take the early down work. He's actually not that bad of a pass catcher as well, but he's not on ETN's level. So ETN will be highly involved in the passing game, and I think Tank Bigsby is going to kind of be the early down back. He might get some of the goal line touches. The real question mark with Bigsby, similar to kind of ETN as well, is ball security. Can he hold onto the football? Is fumbling going to be an issue? If it is, ETN's value is going to keep climbing. If he can hold onto the football, Tank Bigsby could have sneaky low-end RB2 value as early as 2023. The other guys on this list I like quite a bit. Josh Downs, he's small, but he landed in a spot where he is probably going to play pretty early. He's a slot wide receiver that could fit really nicely between the 2 big-bodied guys in Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce. I think he could be a safety blanket for Anthony Richardson, who is trying to figure out the NFL game and truly get experience as a quarterback. So I think Josh Downs in PPR leagues has value. Outside of PPR leagues, I think his value is really, really limited because of his size, because of what this offense is going to do, especially in year one of Anthony Richardson. Marvin Mims, I don't love the landing spot, but I like the player. We'll see how the Denver Broncos targets shake out. He's a guy who I'm fine taking a gamble on at the late second, early third round, but ultimately I think his ceiling is going to be capped, especially if they don't move on from one of these wide receivers in Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. Jayden Reed is actually a guy I really like. He could be better than Christian Watson right now. I think he might be one of those guys who comes onto the field a little bit later than we're hoping. We could see a midseason breakout for Jayden Reed. He's probably going to end up being the wide receiver 2 for this team, but when it comes to PPR and overall volume, he could be the better asset than the Christian Watson. Michael Mayer is the next guy on the list. I think he's a solid tight end. He's a master of none, similar to a Kendre Miller at running back. That's Michael Mayer at tight end. He's just a sound technician at the tight end position. He landed in a spot that's going to need a tight end early, so he could get on the field, but I wonder about his upside. I think he might be a low ceiling, high floor type of tight end for the long term, but I'm basically avoiding him in 2023. And in Dynasty leagues, just throw him on your taxi squad because tight end takes a minute, and I think Michael Mayer won't be an exception to that rule. I put Cedric Tillman at the end of this list. I think he could be the wide receiver 2 for this team by the end of the season, but again, it might be by the end of the season. I think he's better than Donovan Peoples-Jones, who is a player that I do believe in. But ultimately, it's going to take some time for Tillman. He's already a little bit older. He came out older. He's a guy I love taking a shot on because physically, he is the prototypical wide receiver for the NFL. He could improve his route running a little bit, but he's a dominant physical player when he's on the field. If you've got a question about a player I didn't talk about or questions about players I did talk about that you want to know more, drop questions below. I'll get to everything I can. Don't forget to be kind, do good, and I'll see you next time. Peace.